Hey guys, it's been a while since I've uploaded a video, and I apologize for it. But I'm back again for a brand new full process video. In this one, I'll be showing you guys how I made this Lucy model, starting from making the mesh, adding a rig to it, weight painting it, texturing, and posing. Without further ado, let's get into it. First off, I added some reference pictures on the work area. It's just some simple topology references since I am making a low poly model, but this time not with segmented limbs. The first thing I like to do is to divide the default cube in half and then adding a mirror modifier. Since the base model would most likely be symmetrical, doing this would save me a lot of time in terms of modeling. I start by shaping the main torso. I think it's better to start it this way since it helped me later on in determining the right proportions for the other body parts. I used the references to help me guide in shaping it and keeping the polygon count to a minimum. It's not too difficult to shape it since I just imagine in my head this sort of peanut shape with female curves. The main thing here is to create a natural arc for the spine and also thinning the stomach area since Lucy has a slim figure to her. It's just some nudges here and there that can make the torso look a lot better. I added some loop cuts to the hip or pelvis part since I wanted it to be smoother on the bottom area. Plus, it also helped me in advance when I started working on the thighs and legs. For the base of the arms, I inserted some vertices for the armhole, and then using the loop tools add-on, I manipulated those vertices into a hexagonal shape, which works really well for making low poly hands later on the process. The length of the arms should be slightly longer than the height of the entire torso. I just sort of eyeballed it, which kinda works. So long as it doesn't look too short or too long, it's pretty much right. Since the chest area doesn't have good topology at the moment, I had to use the knife tool to make a loop cut. I had to add this since I needed an area where I could connect the bust area later on. It also helped in making the model's topology look a lot better. Once I've added the loop cuts for the bust area, I went on and shaped it accordingly. I also turned on the face orientation tool so that I could see which side is facing front. I do recommend turning it on before starting to work on your models. I just forgot about it when I was doing this model. Having a reference for the bust area would certainly help in this process, but I've done a couple of these meshes before, so I didn't need it at that moment. I did struggle a bit shaping it, but it's nothing that patience and a little bit of trial and error can't fix. Do keep in mind and try to keep the mesh for the bust area just on the front half of the mesh as much as possible. I had some experience where I modeled a mesh bust before that used too much mesh area that it kinda broke in a way. I also added some loop cuts on the shoulder part so that I could make squares instead of triangles when connecting the vertices. I do try to keep most of the meshes square since if you do plan on using the subdivide modifier, it makes the mesh divide in a better manner. At this point, the torso is pretty much done. What I just had to do was make the topology a bit cleaner and adjusted some vertices here and there. Other than that, it was just me refining the torso shape bit by bit. Here, I sort of discovered a problem. Since the back didn't have enough vertices to work with, I had to add a vertical loop cut on the mesh. It was really necessary to do so, not only because it makes for better topology, but it also gave the thighs and legs later on a much better base shape to work with. I wasn't really sure if that was the right call at that moment, but the model did benefit it later on. I was able to make the bottom area smoother and have a better shape, as well as the bust area. After fixing the problem, I went back into adjusting the little bits here and there, till I was able to make a shape where I was sort of satisfied with. Then I started working on the arms. I just did the arms first without the hands, since I wanted to get the entire torso right first before delving into the more intricate body parts. It was relatively quick since I just had to add the elbow joint area and shape the arm in a more natural form. Then the legs. At first, I really thought that the legs look really weird and that I didn't think I could shape it all well. I had to reshape the hips just to make the legs work. I wanted the model to have a wider hips, but if I did so, there would be an unnaturally wide gap between the legs. But after being able to settle on the shape of the legs and hips, I continued to adjust the little bits again to further enhance the shape of the model. It's really tedious, and I think this is where I spent most of my time with, but it was worth it in the end since it kinda turned out well. Then the neck. This one was pretty straightforward. I just had to shape it closely to the reference and make it so that it doesn't look too thin that it would look like it could break. I just took a bit more of my time on it since I wanted it to get it right on my first attempt. Working on the legs, it was pretty much the same with the arms. I just had to shape it in a more natural form and add the knee joint area. This was a pretty cool part of the process since this is where I was able to get a general idea on how the finished model would look like. Then I extended the ankle hole for the base of the foot mesh. Then I just shaped it in a simple rectangular shoe. Then again, I proceeded to adjusting the little things again. I then went back to the shoes to create a much better shape for it. Whenever things get a bit more trickier, I try to use the knife tool a bit more to help me in making loop cuts. There was no fancy techniques here that I did. I just tried my best to shape it into a shoe with visible soles. I could have gone the route of making the shoe just a boring rectangle shape, but I wanted a bit more detail on the foot since I didn't want to make it look bland on the finished model. So I added some curves on it and make it so that I would also be able to rig the front end part of the shoes. Then the hands. I really didn't want to mess this part up, so for this one, I did look up a reference on how I would be able to make it look natural while still being low poly. Basically, my process for this part was just to copy what worked for others. I did try to put a bit more style on the hands, but I didn't want to risk it, so I just stick with what works well. This part here is something I didn't know about. I just saw it in the reference I was looking at, and honestly, This was a game changer since I was able to make fingers so quickly. I didn't have any plan before this on how to handle fingers, so I'm glad that I was able to learn this. Also, after I was able to tackle the fingers, everything else clicked. I was able to change and shape parts of the hands to my liking, and I kinda was able to add my own spin to it. As you can see, I was able to make the hands look thinner and a bit more natural. I was a little scared to change the entire shape of the hand, but I had to, since it looks much better that way. I decided to make the finger joints a lot more simpler. It takes lesser vertices and it works. That was enough for me. Now, making the head was a bit easier since that is something I do a lot for my models and commissions. I first needed to find a reference of Lucy from a side view angle. After that, I traced the side view angle so that I could use it later to shape the front of the face. I had to adjust the neck a bit to make it work. Then I did pretty much the same thing for the front of the face. But as you can see, since the references don't match each other's proportion, I had to adjust the vertices manually and come up with a shape that resembles both of the references. After being satisfied with the new shape of the outlines, I just had to adjust the overall shape and proportions of the face. It's really tedious, but I think I was able to nail it well. Now all that's left to do is to connect all the vertices and make a mesh for the head. This part was enjoyable, but I had a couple of problems I faced when doing the nose and the mouth. I had a couple of ideas in mind at that time, but I wasn't able to fully make it to reality. So, after trying to make the nose look cool and the mouth to be a bit more indented rather than flat, I just came to my senses and made it as simple as I can. As you can see here, I was trying to be bold with how I was going to shape the nose. It just made it too complicated and unnecessary. So I just ended up cleaning it and making a normal looking nose. This part was just me connecting the other vertices. Nothing too important. Here, I made a simple pair of ears. Then I continued to connect the vertices and then I closed the mesh of the head. Then for the main hair mesh, I first duplicated the head mesh and then used it as a base where I could delete some of the faces and shape it into hair strands. Then here, I just shape the back side of the hair and make it look similar to what Lucy has in the show. Then I added a solidify modifier to make it thicker and so that I could texture the underside of the hair even though it wouldn't be seen that much. I pretty much did the same thing for the inner hair. Since it had a simpler shape, I was able to make it in no time. Similar with the hair, I first duplicated the body mesh, then used the knife tool to cut out the overall shape of the jacket. This actually worked really well, given that I've not done a separate cloth mesh yet, and that this was technically the first time I have done so. Then I adjusted the thickness of the sleeves to separate it a bit from the base body mesh. Then I had to smooth out the collar of the jacket since I would be making the thick collar that Lucy's jacket had. I also bumped out some of the faces since her jacket does not necessarily follow the flow of her body shape. After I was able to smooth out the collar, I extended those edges, and I'm pretty much done with the overall shape of the jacket. All that was left to do was to solidify the mesh and do some last touch-ups. I did ended up spending too much time on the jacket since I wasn't able to wrap my head around on how to make the solidify modifier work on such a complex shape. I cut that figuring out part since I basically just used the modifier as how it was supposed to be used. I basically just closed some of the armholes and connected the multiple pieces of the jacket. Then I was technically done on making all the mesh for the model. I also just added an outline for the suit Lucy wears since I knew in advance that I was going to texture that area separate from the other parts. Now, when it comes to rigging models, you first have to add bones or armature. To get started with it, you have to first Shift A and select armature, then single bone. Then you first should go to this stickman icon. Then under the viewport display, check the box for the in front. It will make adjusting and editing the bones much easier. Then it'll just be a matter of creating a skeleton with enough bones to your liking. This process is not as complicated as it seems. If you're from Blockbench, it's kinda similar to when you're grouping certain meshes inside a folder. What you do want to keep in mind is to place the joints right where you think they should be. It's okay if the skeleton rig doesn't turn out perfect at first try. You can always adjust it even after creating the mesh weights. Also, don't forget to name your bones. A quick way to complete a symmetrical skeleton rig is by symmetrizing half of what you've already rigged. Just make sure that everything on one side has a direction indicator on the name such as L or left and vice versa. I think an advice I can give here is to check references online. I just kinda winged it here since I'm sort of familiar with what I'm supposed to do. But I did have to adjust the skeleton later on, but not so much that it was a burden. After making the half and making sure it has proper naming, you could then select all the bones, then go to Armature and find Symmetrize. It should automatically create the other half for you. Now, it won't still be able to manipulate the mesh you've made since we haven't parented it yet to the skeleton armature. To do so, you first have to be in object mode. Then select the mesh first and then the skeleton armature second. Then press Ctrl P for parent and select automatic weights. You could say that we're pretty much done for this phase, but we still have to edit those generated weights to make the folding of each of the joints a lot smoother and more appealing to look at. But before you start to do so, turn on these settings first. At the very top icon, while in weight paint mode, you'll be able to access the symmetry settings of this mode. It'll make it so that the opposite bone of the one you're currently editing would also have the same weight paint values without having the need to select it in the first place. Also, to select bones in weight painting mode, you have to press on Alt then left click on the bone you want to edit. Also, in the stickman icon, you can change the appearance of the bones to your liking. I like mine to appear as bars or thin lines. To enter weight paint mode, click on the armature, then the mesh. Then you'll be able to access it in the modes dropdown. Now, it will just be a matter of trial and error. While painting, make sure that you are testing the bone for every weight paint edits you make. Being able to do this phase fast would really depend on how much time you've already spent weight painting models. For me, it still took me a while since I'm more used to rigging segmented models. What I also noticed is that having great topology on your meshes greatly affects how well the joints react to the weight paints you've added. But since I'm doing a low poly model, I wouldn't mind some of the meshes clipping from each other. Also, as you can see, I adjust the bones to make certain joints fold a lot better. I also rigged some of the hair strands so that I could post it in a dynamic way later. The process is pretty much the same with the previous one. I first added some new bones for the hair. I just added the same amount of bones equal to the segments of the hair strands. I then selected the mesh first, then the armature second. Then I Ctrl P and selected automatic weights. Then it was the same matter of trial and error. I just about repeated the process for the jacket mesh. And yes, for texturing, I still use Blockbench since it is still my main tool for pixel art texturing. Since we used the mirror modifier in Blender, the first thing I did was to cut the model in half. Since I will be using the PS1 size for textures, which is 256 by 256, doing so will help me in terms of fitting all the UVs in that small size, while still having enough details to work with. I then further separated the meshes into portions that I know I will be working on. I first started with the torso, since I knew I needed to put enough detail on it to make it look good. I just used the project on view and the camera keypad on Blockbench to create the UV maps. Then I snapped the vertices to the grid to get that clean look and flow. Then I created this grid texture so that I could check the flow of the texture on the model and be able to adjust the corresponding vertices to make it look better and seamless. And from that, I adjusted the UV mappings accordingly. This is pretty much the process for all the other meshes. It takes a while to finish this part of the process, but I like to make sure everything works before I start texturing the model. I used a pretty bad color for the grid texture, which kinda made the visibility of the UV maps worse, but it did do its job. But if you are going to implement this into your workflow, I do suggest using the neon green color since it contrasts really good with other colors. Then I start texturing, and honestly, I don't know how to deal with this part of the video since this parts really takes so long to play even in time-lapse. But since this video is a full process video, I'll try and keep everything intact and in a watchable speed. What I'm basically doing in this part of the process is just drawing. I decided to use a minimal amount of color variety per tone so that I wouldn't wash the model with too much color. It's usually just the base color, the highlight, and the light shadows and the dark shadows. Most of the time, I just use 4 variations of a color for my models. The video is already in 15 times speed, and if I go any further, I'd just be better off cutting the process into transitioning bits. I really ran out of things to say here since it is a pretty basic process. It's just that there's not much to explain. So yeah, for these parts, I just like to let the video play and show itself the process. As you can see here, I was able to work on the model a lot better if separated into smaller meshes. This one here is the hip area, and I was able to fit its UV map right into the empty arc area of the UV map of the torso. It means I save a lot of space if I were to put it somewhere else. I also had to adjust the vertical length of this UV map to compensate for the texture belt that Lucy has. For the arm, still pretty much the same process all over again, except for this one, I was able to do it a lot faster since it's a pretty basic shape. I usually do this process while listening to some albums I like, and I would be able to listen to like multiple albums before finishing the texturing process. So it's like around 5 to 6 hours tops. Actually, sometimes to get the right tone of skin shadow or any shadow for a color, I like to use the multiply mode and change the opacity of the brush to something lighter, then stack the paint onto each other until I get a color I'm satisfied with. Again, same, but hands. For the UV maps of the fingers, I just stack them onto one another since they basically all look and textured the same, but in just different lengths. Then again, same for the legs. It's like arms but vertical. Now, the shoes are pretty boring, but I still needed a lot of effort and time to make it look decent. Since the hair is also a separate mesh, I was able to UV map it really easy. I might actually start making hair separate meshes again because of this. I think the easiest UV map is the face. For this one, I needed a lot of space so that I would be able to draw her eyes as accurate as I can. I didn't want it to be a generic looking pixel eye since Lucy actually has a pretty unique eye design compared to other characters. Also, I duplicated the mesh from time to time to be able to check the proportions of the facial features I'm drawing. It took me a while to get the right sizes, but I think I was able to get the essence of how Lucy's face looked like. For the jacket, again, I divided the mesh into two halves so that I would only need to UV map and texture one side. I also separated the arm sleeves since that was something I knew was easy to do, so I just left it for last. I first tried to do the collar since I thought that it was the one that's going to take the longest to do, which kinda was. I knew I didn't have enough space to spread all the faces to its proper proportions, so I just utilized the repeating textures and just squashed the UV maps for the colors. I could have just stacked them all to save a lot more space, but I didn't want to fiddle around those stacks just in case something was wrong with the UV maps. Now, texturing and mapping the body area of the jacket, it was pretty simple since it was mostly a flat surface and pretty much straightforward. And like the body, the arms were pretty much straightforward. And with that done, this is how our model looks now. When you import the model back to Blender, you will still need to change some stuff in order to get the model to look exactly the same as it did in Blockbench. The first thing you need to do is to go to Shading and then remove the principled BSDF. You have to connect the main texture file to the material output. Then change the linear to the closest. But the colors aren't still the same. To change that, go to the camera icon and scroll to the bottom until Color Management. Then change View Transform to Standard. It should now look like the same as it did in Blockbench. Another thing is to select all the meshes and go to Edit Mode. Select all the edges and click on Clear Sharp. Since we've imported the model from Blockbench back to Blender, we have to reapply the weight paint data again. To transfer the weight paint data to the textured model, you have to first select the untextured mesh, then shift-click on the textured model. You then have to go to weight paint mode, click on weights, and then click on transfer weight. make sure that the source layer selection is on by name. And as you can see in the vertex data, the mesh now has the same weight paint as it did before. The names we've applied to the bones also help make this weight transfer a lot easier. But we still have to reparent the mesh to the armature in order to pose the mesh. What I did is to duplicate the original armature or skeleton and move it to the new folder or collection. Then, like what we did before, we press on Ctrl P, but now instead of automatic weights, we just click on armature deform. And as you can see, we now can pose the model. The same process is to be done for the jacket as well. And as well as for the hair mesh. To make the posing similar to how Blockbench does it, you have to change this option from global to local, and then use the rotate gizmo. And as you can see, it is now very similar with how Blockbench does pose rotation for segmented models. And here, I'm just posing the model to one of the more common poses Lucy does in the show. This pretty much is the easiest and funnest portion of the process, since it's basically like playing a game. That is pretty much all for this full process video. I hope this video helps in any way for you guys if you are planning on learning Blender. I know I didn't put too much jargons or intricate steps in this process since I didn't want to make Blender sound confusing or intimidating. It takes a while to learn, but it's actually pretty simple once you get the hang of it. And again, I'd like to apologize for the lack of updates on this channel. We barely get any break from our terms, and I did just finish my last term a couple of days ago, and we already have to go back in like a week and a half. I'll try to post a bit more, but I can't really promise it since some of the subjects I'm taking can be pretty time heavy. But other than that, I hope this video helps you guys, and here is how the final model looks like.